New figures published today show a record number of discrimination reports in football last season. Anti-racism charity Kick It Out's annual review has revealed incidents involving sexism, racism and faith abuse are on the rise. And I'm glad to say that we've got Holly Varney in from Kick It Out to take us through some of the statistics. If we could have an overall look at the report from last season, Holly, what kind of stands out to you here? And can you just explain to our audience what makes up these statistics?
Of course, yeah, we've seen a massive increase again this year in reports across the game, so in professional game, grassroots and social media. Some of the trends that we've seen is racism is still a massive form of our reports that we receive across the game, so we know that's an issue that we still need to do a lot more around. Sexism is increasingly on the rise, particularly online, so we know that there's a lot more work to be done there. And then when it comes to grassroots, again, we're seeing a range of different issues that we need to, again, address and put actions in place.
And like you said, we've got in the green, we've got the professional game, in the orange, we've got the grassroots, and in blue, social media. In terms of the professional game, I think we've seen a slight decrease from last season to the season before, but we have seen more of the professional players receive abuse. Where have you seen, what sort of response have you seen, and what support have you given players who've, if a professional game, we've seen that stat there?
Yeah, so we've seen less reports towards professional players, but we have seen an increase in incidents. So what we've seen is less people reporting the same incident, but we still have seen a huge amount of incidents aimed at professional players. So what I would say is in stadiums, we've seen a lot of actions taken, which has acted as a deterrent for people that have been discriminatory within stadiums. So we've seen bans handed out, we've seen fines issued, and we've seen arrests and sentences. So that's been a positive in terms of the outcomes there, but what we are seeing is an increase in abuse aimed towards professional players online. And one of the most alarming things that we've seen is that a lot of the racist abuse aimed towards professional players goes relatively unchecked, so is still quite visible on their platform. So these aren't messages that are being sent to their DMs or that are hidden, these are in public view. So we know that the Online Safety Act has a role to play in addressing that.
And what we're seeing here, this is the number of reports, so it's not the number of incidents, but I think the number of reports, for every incident we've got, it's 1.5 reports. So in that sense, are we seeing that football fans are becoming less tolerant of this kind of abuse in the game? And is that a positive that people are starting to report it more and more?
Yeah, 100%. So I think the first thing to flag is obviously, as we see an increase, it's quite hard to say whether that's because there's more incidents and it's getting worse, or whether that's because the awareness of us as a reporting channel and of the issues that we see across the game are more prevalent. So what we're really pleased to see is that people are reporting more the same incident. So hopefully that makes sense to people watching. So for every incident that happens within football, we'll see 2, 3, 4, 5 people report the same incident. So that definitely shows that people are becoming less tolerant, and we're really pleased to see that.
How worried are you about this number here? Social media last season, 589 reports. That's more than all of the years previous combined. Yeah, how worried about you about this number?
Really concerned about social media abuse, and it's been, as you can see, a continuing trend over the past few seasons. So some of the areas where we've seen really awful abuse is aimed, as I mentioned, racist abuse towards professional players, predominantly in the men's game. When it comes to women working across all areas of football, so pundits, commentators, club staff, players as well, and officials within the game, we're seeing a massive increase in sexist and misogynistic language aimed at those people. So that's become a huge factor in terms of what we need to address. As I mentioned, the Online Safety Act should hopefully have a role to play in that, and that will come into play in the next 12 months, and we're playing our part in terms of having those discussions with Ofcom to make sure that our recommendations are taken forward.
You mentioned sexism and misogynistic comments online. If we look here, I think still the majority of these that you're getting are from the platform X, but we've seen a huge increase in terms of these reports on Instagram. What have you put that down to? I know you had a bit of a smaller base in terms of the numbers, but also how worrying is that statistic, 450% year on year and increasing?
Yeah, it's really worrying. I think if you asked any woman that has a social platform what sort of abuse they receive, I think you'd find that most women have faced some sort of sexism or misogyny in their working life or through their platforms. So I think it's just becoming more prevalent in the fact that there's more awareness on women's football, there's more discussions around what a woman's place should be when it comes to football. That's been a contributing factor to the rise in these numbers. What I do think is positive is that we've put sexism and misogyny on the forefront of issues that we are having as a football collective. So a positive for us is that the issues being highlighted, the challenges that we want to understand the scale of it. We want people to come forward and tell us more about the issues that they're having so that we can actually address it. So the next step for us is creating an action plan that really drives down the numbers, particularly for women.
And what kind of work were you doing with the platforms to get this out of the game, or to work with them to decrease that sort of thing that we're seeing there?
I think the social media companies are challenging in that, as I mentioned before, a lot of the abuse that we're seeing on the channels such as X, Instagram, YouTube, they're not being taken down. So they're still very much in public view. I think there's a piece around education that needs to come in. So I don't think many people see sexism and misogyny as something that's discriminatory. It's been questioned as whether it's banter and what can be done about it. We want to say that that's a really serious problem. We also need the social media companies to take it seriously. But again, the Online Safety Act will hold them to account, and that will come into play over the next 12 months.
And look, we've broken down the types of language that's used in terms of sexism and misogyny. As you can see here, huge majority of that is this green section here, place in the game. Just tell us exactly about what that means. And also you can see there, it's increased year on year again, nearly 44%.
Yeah, so the big green area is around questioning women's place to work within football. And obviously our belief is that that is absolutely down to women. So a lot of the abuse that we're seeing in that category in particular is around men questioning whether women should be allowed to commentate on men's football, what their role should be within men's football specifically. But I think as the platform for women's football has grown as well, that's obviously opened up debates around women generally in football as a whole. So we know that's a really prominent issue and something that we absolutely need to address, but this comes down to behaviour within the game. So education will play a huge part in addressing that as well.
In terms of the place in the game, is this coming from, like you said, TV pundits, stuff like that? Because we've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence with the likes of Eni Aluko, Jill Scott, Karen Carney, who talked about this. But is that what we're seeing here, online abuse directed at some of our female pundits?
Yeah, definitely. So they're one part of it, is the people that you'll see on TV that might be broadcasters, commentators. They certainly make up a percentage of that, but also players. I think if you went and looked at any piece of content on social media that features clips from a women's football game, that features a broadcast, a snippet taken from a television broadcast, or even a clip of a young girl playing football, it will be inundated with sexist and misogynistic language all around questioning what their role is within football. So, yeah, there's obviously, as I mentioned, a huge piece of work to do around changing those behaviours and attitudes.
And if you just step back there, I think we can also see that 21% sexually degrading language, 6% in terms of violent and threatening as well. And I know this season, there's been a record amount in terms of the WSL players who've reported incidents or have had incidents reported about them. I think there's been 12 reports, around 8 WSL players. Were these mainly in-game instances of abuse or online as well?
So a mix. We saw some abuse that was aimed at players within stadiums, and actually the perpetrators of that, there were some positive outcomes in terms of the action taken. So bans and a fine, and we want to see more of that as that happens and grows within the women's game. But then, yeah, as I mentioned, the other half really was down to the online abuse, so players being targeted on their social channels, as well as fans simply for being fans of football because they're a woman. That's why they've been targeted. So, yeah, again, this is all about addressing behaviours towards women that are involved in football.
I know you're a coach as well. You work as a football coach. Is this something you've seen on the ground, personally with yourself or the players that you coach?
It is, yeah. Unfortunately, I think we've spoken to a number of female football coaches around the challenges they've had in football, and it is generally a sense of attitude towards women being more prominent in football that seems to upset maybe some men that aren't used to so many women being around the game. But yeah, generally it's an issue with behaviours and attitude. So I've personally experienced, threatening and abusive language, sexist and misogynistic language about what my role should be when it comes to football. But we are seeing a lot more women come forward, and obviously we want to grow the amount of women that are working in football. So we really hope this, as alarming as these sound, we really hope that doesn't put women off. And we've got a lot of work coming up over the next 12 months to really engage women and support them through roles that they might want to take up within football.
Specifically, what are you doing in that space? You just mentioned some work you've got going on. Do you want to let us know a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're looking to increase the pool of female coaches, so we're doing a bit of work around that. We're looking to develop more education around addressing some of the behaviours towards women. And we're also doing a lot of work in terms of educating football as a whole on what sexism and misogyny is as a starting point and what we can put in place to address it. And that really will be led by a lot of the work that we do in the education space.
I think we've just got a final graphic sort of looking at some of the different other areas that we've got in terms of where we saw abuse last season, because obviously it's not just sexism and misogyny, we've got racism and faith as well. Look, just Can you just remind people in terms of how they can report these kind of abuses, if it's for something they've seen, if it's something personal, if it's at a game, if it's during a game they've played? How would you advise that they would go about reporting something like this?
Yeah, so firstly, I would say it takes a lot of courage for people to come forward and report. So we really applaud the people that have been part of this report and have shared their stories and experiences with us. So it's really important that people continue to report to us so that we can see the issues across football season on season. And just to add, in terms of just a positive, with the insight that we gain in terms of what's happening across the different areas of football, whether that's grassroots, professional or social media, it gives us that insight to be able to then address those issues in a bit more of a targeted way. So yeah, people can visit our website, go on our socials, and there's lots of different ways people can report to us.
I mean, in terms of this graph here, I know these are year-on-year increases, so racism up by 55% in terms of the reports, incidents reported, 44% like we've just been through in terms of sex and misogyny, and 31% in terms of faith. I know we've seen a big rise in the increase of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism since the October attacks of last year. And also racism, I think, accounts for more than 50% of abuse as well.
Yeah.
How do you support somebody who's gone through this, whether that be a grassroots player or a professional player?
Yeah, so we have a team in place, a reporting service and a grassroots team that will support any individual that comes forward to us. So as I mentioned, it takes a lot of courage to make a report, so we applaud people that do that with us. And then we have staff that support those individuals that do make a report to us that have gone through something obviously quite challenging, upsetting. So yeah, as I mentioned, those that report to us, we do have support services in place to make sure that they're really fully supported throughout the process.
Has it been a tough year? I mean, it seems like in terms of the sexism and misogyny that we've seen big increases online. Or overall, has it been a tough environment to work in, seeing all of that abuse that's been happening in the last season?
Yeah, I think look, these stats can be quite alarming, and obviously there's been increases across the board, as we can see. However, from our perspective, we're really passionate about creating change in some of these areas. So as I mentioned, this is great insight for us to help us drive change moving forward. So we have a really passionate group of staff, and we're still committed to changing some of the issues that we see across the game.
And finally, anything else planned for next year in terms of improving this area, this space?
Yeah, the main thing for us is that we want to drive more positive outcomes when it comes to the report. So we've seen some examples of that in terms of fans being arrested, bans being handed out, fines being issued. We want to increase the level of positive outcomes. So there's a bit of work for us to be done in terms of what evidence we capture, how we work with the football authorities. So that's a huge priority for us.